If 2025 felt overwhelming, confusing, or like everything online started to blur together, you're not imagining it. More content is being created than ever before, but at the same time, people are trusting it less than ever. You scroll through posts, videos, ads, and advice, but something feels off. It becomes harder to tell what is real, what is automated, and what is actually useful. And if you are trying to build something, whether that is a business, a personal brand, or even just a skill that helps you stay relevant, it can feel like the ground is constantly shifting. Every few months, there is a new tool, a new shortcut, or a new promise that claims to change everything. But here is the part most people are missing. While everyone is focusing on speed, automation, and shortcuts, something else is quietly happening in the background. A shift is taking place, and it is moving in the opposite direction. It is moving back toward human skills. The ability to communicate clearly, to think critically, and to connect with people is becoming more valuable again. And this shift is not small. It is creating one of the biggest opportunities we have seen in years for people who understand how to use these skills properly. So in this video, we are going to break down what is actually changing, what will matter most in 2026, and how you can position yourself ahead of this shift instead of reacting to it later. To understand this shift clearly, we need to look at how AI has changed the way content is created and consumed. AI has made it extremely easy to produce content at scale. Ideas, captions, scripts, and even complete strategies can now be generated within minutes. At first, this felt like a massive advantage because it removed the effort barrier that once slowed people down. But over time, something else started to happen. As more people began using the same tools, the output started to look and feel very similar. The tone became predictable, the structure became repetitive, and the originality started to fade. Even when the information was technically correct, it often lacked depth and perspective, and people began to notice this shift. Not always consciously, but through their behavior. They started scrolling faster, skipping more content, and becoming more selective about what they actually paid attention to. They began questioning whether what they were seeing was created by a real person or generated automatically. This creates a very important change in how attention works, because when trust decreases, attention becomes more filtered. People don't just consume content anymore, they evaluate it. They look for signals that help them decide whether something is worth their time. And this is where the opportunity begins to appear. Because in a space where everything looks similar, the content that feels clear, human, and intentional stands out immediately. One of the strongest signals of this shift is the return of storytelling, and not just as a creative choice, but as a strategic advantage. For a long time, content became highly formula-driven. Short tips, quick hacks, list-based formats, and templated ideas dominated almost every platform. It was efficient and easy to produce, but it also made content feel interchangeable. Now people are looking for something more meaningful. They don't just want information. They want to understand how something works in a real situation. They want to see how ideas apply in practice, not just in theory. Think about how you personally remember content. You rarely remember isolated facts, but you remember experiences, examples, and stories. That is because stories create both emotional and logical connections at the same time. They give context, and context makes information easier to understand and retain. For example, explaining a strategy might help someone understand the concept at a surface level, but showing how someone used that strategy, what challenges they faced, and what changed as a result makes it far more impactful. And that is exactly why storytelling is becoming powerful again. Because in a space filled with automated and repetitive content, real experiences become the strongest signal of authenticity. This shift also explains why personal branding is becoming more important than ever before, and not just as a trend, but as a direct response to how people now evaluate information. People are no longer just looking at what is being offered. They are paying close attention to who it is coming from. Because when multiple options look similar, identity becomes the deciding factor. Think about how you personally choose who to follow or trust online. It is rarely based only on information. It is based on how that information is delivered, how consistently that person shows up, and whether their perspective feels clear and reliable over time. That repeated exposure creates familiarity, and familiarity begins to reduce uncertainty. And this is where personal branding becomes practical. It is not about sharing everything or constantly being visible everywhere. It is about creating a recognizable presence that allows people to understand your way of thinking. When people begin to understand how you approach problems, they start to feel more confident in your ability to help them. For example, sharing your process, your reasoning, or even how you arrive at certain decisions gives your audience a clearer picture of how you work. That clarity builds connection, and connection builds trust. Over time, that trust becomes a deciding factor, because people are not just choosing information anymore. They are choosing people they feel confident learning from. Another important shift is happening in how people make decisions, especially when it comes to buying, and this change is directly connected to how trust is formed. In the past, urgency and hype were often enough to push people toward action. Strong claims, limited time offers, and bold promises could quickly capture attention and drive quick decisions. But that behavior is changing. Today, people are more aware, more cautious, and more selective. They take more time to evaluate options, and they look for signals that help them feel confident before making a decision. This means they are not just reacting to what is being said, they are analyzing how it is being presented. Think about a simple comparison. If you see one offer that promises fast results without explaining how it works, and another that clearly walks you through the process, the timeline, and what you can realistically expect, the second option immediately feels more reliable. That feeling of clarity reduces hesitation, and when hesitation is reduced, decisions become easier. This is why trust is becoming one of the most important factors in modern marketing, not built through exaggeration or pressure, but built through clarity and transparency. Because when people understand what they are getting, how it works, and what to expect, they feel more confident moving forward. And that confidence is what ultimately drives action. Another important shift that is becoming very visible is how platforms now measure engagement and decide what content gets shown. In the past, visibility was often driven by simple signals like views, likes, or reach. But today, those signals are no longer enough on their own because they do not always represent real interest or meaningful interaction. If you think about your own behavior, you can see this clearly. You might scroll past dozens of posts without reacting, but when something truly connects with you, you are more likely to comment, share it with someone, or even start a conversation around it. And platforms are designed to track exactly that difference. Because of this, engagement is no longer just about passive consumption. It is about active interaction. Comments, shares, saves, and direct messages now signal a deeper level of interest, and these signals carry more weight in how content is distributed. This creates an important shift in how marketing works. Instead of focusing only on broadcasting messages to as many people as possible, the focus moves toward creating content that invites participation. Content that makes people think, respond, or share naturally performs better over time. And when content starts generating these types of interactions consistently, platforms begin to amplify it further. So what used to be a one-way communication model is now becoming a two-way interaction system. Another shift that connects directly to this is how conversations are becoming more valuable than broadcasts. And this change reflects how people now interact with content on a daily basis. For a long time, marketing followed a simple pattern where you create content, publish it, and expect results based on reach alone. That approach worked when attention was easier to capture and competition was lower. But today, attention behaves differently. People are not just consuming content passively, they are actively deciding what deserves their interaction. And that decision often comes down to how relatable or relevant something feels in the moment. When content reflects something people are already thinking or experiencing, it naturally invites a response. Think about a simple comparison. A highly polished piece of content may look impressive, but if it feels distant or generic, it often gets ignored. On the other hand, a simple idea that directly reflects a shared experience can create a much stronger reaction, even if it is less refined. This highlights an important shift. Connection is becoming more valuable than perfection. And when your content creates that connection, it naturally leads to conversations. Those conversations increase visibility, strengthen relationships, and build trust over time, making your content more effective without needing to rely on constant promotion. Another major shift that is becoming more important is the role of context in how content is understood, and this change is directly connected to how people process information today. In the past, posting more content often led to more visibility because there was less competition and fewer distractions. But now, content has become easy to produce, and because of that, volume alone is no longer enough to stand out. What makes content effective today is not how much you post, but how relevant it feels to the person seeing it at that exact moment. And that relevance comes from context. For example, the same message can feel completely different depending on how and when it is delivered. If your content connects with something your audience is already thinking about or experiencing, it immediately feels more meaningful. It feels like it was made for them, not just published for everyone. This creates a very different kind of engagement. Because instead of passively consuming the content, people start paying attention to it more closely. They begin to relate to it, and that relatability increases the chances that they will respond, share, or remember it later. And this is where context becomes powerful. Because when your message consistently aligns with your audience's situation, your content stops feeling random and starts feeling intentional. And over time, that consistency builds stronger connections, which leads to better engagement and more meaningful results. When you start applying these ideas consistently, you begin to see how content can move beyond just being informative and start becoming influential in a much more structured way. The key difference comes from how clearly your message is understood and how easily someone can connect that understanding to their own situation. For example, if someone watches your content and immediately understands what you are explaining without confusion, that clarity creates confidence. They no longer feel the need to search for additional explanations because they already feel like they have enough understanding to move forward. And that moment is important, because when someone feels confident in what they understand, they begin to associate that clarity with you as the source. Now imagine that same person comes across another piece of your content later, and again, they experience the same level of clarity. That repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity changes behavior. Instead of evaluating you from scratch every time, they start recognizing your content, trusting your explanations, and paying more attention to what you share. Over time, this reduces hesitation and makes decisions easier. This is how content evolves into a system. Because instead of relying on a single piece of content to create an impact, you are building multiple touchpoints that consistently reinforce clarity, and that consistency gradually influences decisions without needing constant persuasion. This is why one of the most important shifts moving into 2026 is not about tools, but about the skills behind how those tools are used. And this difference becomes very clear when you look at how people actually create and communicate content today. Tools can help you generate ideas quickly, structure content faster, and even improve efficiency, but they do not automatically make the content effective, because effectiveness comes from understanding. For example, two people can use the same tool to create content, but the outcome can feel completely different. One piece of content may feel clear, relevant, and easy to understand, while the other may feel generic or disconnected, even if both were created using the same system. And this difference comes from skill. It comes from how well someone understands their audience, how clearly they can explain an idea, and how effectively they can connect that idea to a real situation. These are not things that tools can fully replace. And this is where the shift becomes important. Because as more people rely on automation, the value of human skills increases. The ability to communicate clearly, structure ideas effectively, and create meaningful connections becomes a strong advantage. Over time, these skills compound. The better you become at explaining, the easier it becomes to build trust, attract attention, and influence decisions. And unlike tools, these skills continue to improve with use, making them one of the most reliable ways to stay relevant in a changing environment. So if you want to start applying this in a practical way, the best place to begin is by focusing on your audience and the questions they are already asking. Because these questions usually come from real situations, real challenges, and real decisions that people are actively trying to solve. Instead of trying to constantly create new ideas from scratch, you can start by paying attention to what your audience is already curious about or struggling with. These could be questions about pricing, process, results, or even simple doubts that come up before someone makes a decision. Now think about how this changes your content approach. Instead of creating content just to post something, you begin creating content that directly answers those questions in a clear and structured way. And when someone watches that content, they don't feel like they need to look elsewhere because they already understand what they were trying to figure out. That clarity creates confidence. And when that confidence is repeated across multiple pieces of content, it builds trust over time. Instead of seeing your content as isolated posts, your audience starts seeing it as a reliable source of understanding. And that is where the real shift happens. Because your content is no longer just attracting attention, it is guiding decisions. And when multiple pieces of content work together like this, you are not just posting, you are building a system that continues to create value over time. The real advantage of this approach becomes clear when you start looking at how it builds over time, because this is not just about creating better content in the moment, it is about creating a system that becomes stronger with consistency. When your content consistently delivers clarity, your audience begins to understand your perspective more easily. And as that understanding improves, their confidence in what you are saying also increases. This means that each new piece of content does not start from zero. It builds on the trust that has already been created. Over time, this creates a compounding effect, because instead of constantly trying to convince new viewers from scratch, you are reinforcing familiarity with your existing audience while gradually attracting new people who experience that same clarity for the first time. And both of these groups begin to move toward decisions more naturally. This creates a clear difference. While some people are still trying to rely on volume or constant promotion to get results, others are building systems where trust is developed directly through their content. And that trust continues to grow with each interaction. So instead of chasing attention repeatedly, you are building something that becomes more effective over time. And that long-term advantage is what makes this approach sustainable. At the same time, it is important to understand what happens if this shift is ignored, because the impact is not immediate, and that is what makes it easy to overlook. Most strategies that rely heavily on automation, volume, or surface-level content do not fail instantly. Instead, they begin to lose effectiveness gradually. At first, it might look like a small drop in engagement or slightly lower results. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, but over time, that gap starts to grow, and it becomes harder to understand why the same effort is producing weaker outcomes. This is where many people get stuck, because they continue doing more of the same, assuming that increasing volume will fix the problem, when in reality, the underlying behavior of the audience has already changed. People are becoming more selective, more aware, and more focused on what feels clear and trustworthy. And this creates a widening gap. Those who adapt early begin to build stronger connections and more consistent results, while those who delay continue to experience slower growth without a clear explanation. That is why timing matters. Because once this shift becomes standard, adapting is no longer an advantage, it becomes a necessity. And the earlier you align with it, the easier it is to stay ahead instead of trying to catch up later. At the beginning of this video, we talked about how everything online can start to feel overwhelming, repetitive, and uncertain, especially when it becomes difficult to tell what is real and what actually matters. And now, after going through these shifts, you can see that the confusion is not random. It is a result of how the landscape is changing. But within that change, there is also clarity. Because the future of marketing is not about doing more, posting more, or relying on more tools. It is about communicating better, thinking more clearly, and creating content that actually connects with people in a meaningful way. And the people who understand this shift early are not just going to keep up, they are going to move ahead. Because while others are still chasing speed and automation, they are building trust, clarity, and consistency. So instead of trying to do everything, focus on doing this one thing better. Communicate in a way that people understand, remember, and trust. If this changed how you think about content and marketing, start applying it in your own work. And if you want to stay ahead of these shifts, subscribe to the channel, because this is where we break down what's changing and how to use it before everyone else catches on.